Hello and welcome to the future of classical music. I'm David Taylor and this is my show about big ideas and the people behind them. Today I'm talking with Matt Parkin, the CEO and co-founder of Stagecast, a digital media company that specialises in the filming and broadcasting of classical music concerts. Video content is a dominant part of our lives and it has been for years. Yet before the pandemic, many in classical music had resisted leaning into it, whether that be on TV, dedicated channels like Medici TV, or on social media. During lockdown, we saw a radical acceleration in the adoption of video content. From large organisations to individual musicians, video content became the norm, and we saw experimentation and innovation everywhere. 5 years on from the first lockdown, video content is bigger than ever, and the routes into creating and distributing content are easier than ever before. Yet we've seen a bit of a step back as an industry, often thinking about video content as an afterthought rather than central to our artistic output. Matt's own journey with Stagecast expanding through the pandemic mirrors many organisations in their expansion into video content. In the week after our chat, Stagecast filming of the User X Hockney concert at Lightroom was released on Stage Plus and creatively managed to capture what is a unique three-dimensional visual experience in a two-dimensional format. Because of Matt's journey and his experience with innovation, I thought he would be the perfect person to dive into this topic with. We talk about how the landscape of classical music broadcasting has changed over the last 10 years, the power of live streaming, the process of taking a concert idea to broadcast, the future of broadcasting, and the power of embedding digital in an organisation's artistic vision. You'll be able to watch the full video of both this and all future podcast episodes on both YouTube and Spotify. Video podcasts are a brand new feature on Spotify that's well worth checking out. Right, that's enough from me. Let's jump in. Matt Parkin, you are the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Stagecast, a digital media company. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Really lovely to be here, David. Thanks.
Wonderful. So we have so much to chat about. Digital is such an important part of everyone in the arts and everyone in the world. But before we jump into questions, I just thought it'd be really useful to define some terms before we get into this. So you are a digital media company that does everything around visual and some of the audio that goes with visual. When we have these videos of classical music concerts, what's the best way to define them? Is it a broadcast? Is it filming? Is it streaming? What's the best word for us to carry on with this as we go forwards?
It's all of the above, I think. I think we're often talking about broadcast, but the definition of broadcast, of course, is changing and has changed. So, it's one of the reasons we called the company Stagecast, because that idea of casting, whether we're podcasting today or broadcasting in perhaps a traditional sense, is still what we're doing. We're casting the net wider and getting the art out there to more people. So it is broadcasting, but perhaps not broadcasting as you know it.
Brilliant. So we'll stick with broadcasting and then we'll define any random terms that may come up at certain points.
Yeah.
Perfect. So Stagecast, I think, has a really fascinating journey. So I think it'd be great to hear, before we kick off, your route into Stagecast and its emergence and when it all began.
Okay, yeah. It's a long journey, and I suppose almost a lifelong journey for me, going back to the days of singing in church choirs. I grew up in the Salvation Army, and that was my first music experience. I went to a really good school in terms of the music department and the music we could do there, and that's where I got hooked on classical music in particular. And I also at school developed a habit of tinkering with electrical equipment, old tape machines and record players, and somehow those ended up defining my career. So it took me through a university course and working as a record producer, and 12 years in the end at the BBC, working as a Radio 3 sound soup and in television for a little while. Then another good few years at the Royal College of Music, which was really interesting in terms of combining kind of cutting edge music making from young musicians and young composers with technology in the role I had there. And somehow all of that coalesced into converting me from the audio world to the video world, because my background's very much audio and music professionally. But at some point I got hooked on the visuals as well and the video side of things. And it was at the RCM that Stagecast kind of sprung out of the live streaming that the college had been doing. The Royal College of Music was streaming masterclasses and concerts, and we started getting asked to do that same thing for people outside the college, for commercial clients, until the pandemic came along, and then it all just took off a little bit. And Stagecast is now a company with 6 staff, a roster of 60 or 80 freelancers across the UK that we use, and sometimes beyond. We do everything from fairly straightforward live streams of concerts and music competitions and events, through to some now quite epic scale cinematic music videos where we put 120 musicians into a film studio for a day and do something for a big media company. So a really wide range of stuff that's grown over the time we've been doing it. But it all goes back to loving music when I was a kid, actually. And for better or worse, I'm one of those people who's turned most of my hobbies into a career. So that's now what I do. So there we are.
Certainly not a bad thing. I will give you 10 seconds to humble brag and just list some of the organisations you've collaborated with Stagecast. If you want to do some highlights in 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Well, we're very proud, especially of our link with London Symphony Orchestra, and we do a dozen or so broadcasts a year for them. But also we work with the likes of another dozen UK orchestras, Philharmonia, recently a commercial project, the London Philharmonic, the Academy of Ancient Music. The list goes on and on and on. We love the work with festivals as well. Edinburgh International Festival is a favourite of mine because I lived and worked in Scotland for 10 years. And we now work for Sky Arts, the BBC, and some big games companies around the world as well. So quite a diverse client base.
Really well done for getting such a large amount into such a short period of time.
More than 10 seconds, sorry.
There's always license. So as someone who's obviously been so in the weeds, both working with this and as a passion in broadcast, both visual and audio, for such an extended period of time, how have you seen classical music broadcasting change, particularly over the last 10 years, pre and post pandemic?
Yeah, I think you're right to latch onto the pandemic, because clearly that had a huge effect. But further back than that, I think we're all aware that probably 15 or 20 years ago, the big TV broadcasters started, sadly, to pull back a little bit from the level of especially classical music coverage they do. So that was creating a little bit of a hole and a gap, perhaps, around being able to experience classical music on a screen. And by the time I arrived at the Royal College of Music from the BBC, which was in 2012, the Royal College of Music was probably doing more classical music broadcasting than the BBC in some ways, because they'd already started live streaming concerts at that stage on a server. There was a big computer that lived under a desk somewhere in the college, and you streamed out directly to the public from there, because this was just before the availability of YouTube Live or other live streaming that people could do themselves. So it was quite hard work, very difficult to scale, not the highest resolution in terms of live streams. But when YouTube started offering live streaming in kind of 2011, 2013, I think everybody could then do it in theory. Suddenly that opened up all sorts of possibilities in terms of reach and quality. And certainly we started doing more of that at the RCM. I think we were amongst the first to do it, but so did music and arts organizations around the world themselves. And there were also some pioneers, like, of course, the Berlin Philharmonic with their digital concert hall, which really set the standard, but also cost millions and millions of euros to develop in the first place. So not everyone could do that. But you had at the time this kind of democratizing of the technology, allowing more and more people to do live streams and production, as well as these high-end exemplars of what things could be like if orchestras and other organizations took their digital production in-house. And I think we then spent a good few years seeing how those could coalesce and the quality could develop, and more people could create and own their own broadcast content. Then, of course, you're right, the pandemic was a huge change. I remember people I'd been talking to for 2 or 3 years in the lead up to the pandemic, because Stagecast had started in 2017. about broadcasting and streaming. And they said, oh, it's not quite for us yet. We'd love to do it one day. It's all a bit expensive, isn't it? I'm not sure how we'd fit it in. Is it just a marketing thing? And so the conversations didn't go very far. Come to springtime or summer 2020, and my phone started ringing, and it was a lot of those same people saying, help, we really need a way for our musicians' performances to get out there to the world. So for us, that triggered 18 months of exciting madness, really, rapidly scaling up and doing concerts and broadcasts all up and down the country for lots of different orchestras and things. And I think not only did that accelerate everything from kind of organizations' interest in it, but audiences' understanding and appreciation of performances on screen, to how comfortable musicians were in front of the camera. But it also, for a period, quite a precious period, gave us the chance to be really creative with camera work in performances in a way that hadn't been so easy to do until then. Because when you were in an empty space without a live audience, suddenly the layout can be very different. You don't need to have everybody facing the front in a stage, and cameras can go in all sorts of different places. Even the remote control cameras that we started using, which was very helpful during the pandemic, so you didn't need lots of operators in the space, but they also allowed us to put the cameras right in amongst the musicians, and you could have musicians in a circle where their eye contact and their interaction were completely different to how they'd normally be on stage, where during the performance everyone has to turn and face out. Or we could do different things with lighting or sound or staging, and do things specifically for camera, get musicians speaking to camera. All of that was hugely exciting during the pandemic. So I came out of that thinking, this is the brave new world. We've leapt ahead 5 or 10 years, not necessarily expecting it to continue at the same rate, but hoping that a big chunk of that legacy would continue. And in some ways it has. I think some of those learnings and approaches have, but I'm also a little bit sorry that perhaps more of the broadcasting and digital production that was going on then hasn't sustained. It's a few kind of pioneering organizations that have kept it going. I think for others, it's been really difficult to find the ongoing financial model, both in terms of how much time and money they need to invest and what they get back from it. So that's been a little bit tricky. And finally, I guess where we are now is we have a range of specialist streaming platforms that are starting to kind of solidify a new audience online. Medici TV, of course, has been there for a long time, but you're also seeing things like Deutsche Grammophon Stage Plus, which has really high quality streaming as an offer from Universal Music and DG. And the Digital Concert Hall still there, and Marquee TV has an incredible range of different art forms in one place. Those outlets either weren't available or weren't at that level pre-pandemic, so that's really interesting to see where that might go next.
Certainly, there's so much in there that I love. In particular, what you touched on around this creativity during the pandemic. There was so much experimentation during that period. The one that sprung to mind as you were speaking was Queensland Symphony Orchestra did some amazing videos, and it was almost like a pop music video where they were doing something specifically as visual art, and they'd take the musicians into the city and do something completely unique, which isn't what anyone would be doing before. And I think I'd echo your sort of not echo, because this is my term, not yours, but I was definitely frustrated to see post-pandemic we didn't keep sort of the foot on the gas and move forward with this. I previously wrote a blog about what orchestras could learn from the Premier League being created in the 1990s, and that was in essence a huge investment in broadcast to connect people, which saw a significant increase in funds, revenue, advertising, and live attendance. And understandably, we're all going back to running around like headless chickens because we all are overworked, overtired, and under-resourced. But it does feel like there's still so much opportunity we could really move forwards with that.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely believe there is. I think, I'd love to think that orchestras could attract the same audiences and funding, of course, as Premier League. I don't for one moment think, that quite that scale is.
Yeah.
But I absolutely believe there's an opportunity there, and that it's a commercial opportunity as well as an audience opportunity. And I think it requires bravery and a little bit of risk taking and probably some upfront investment by more of the kind of pioneering organizations to really try and make that case and prove it. And hopefully that would lead to something that all musicians and arts organizations could kind of benefit from.
Definitely. Well, speaking of the sort of pioneering experimentation and finding ways of connecting to audiences, during the pandemic, we saw a lot more live stream classical music. Usually it was pre-recorded, or there wasn't it being the live stream functionality on, say, YouTube, Facebook, even Twitch in some scenarios. Um, do you see any differences or benefits between broadcasting and live streaming? And sort of why is this live element sort of something that can be embraced?
I think they both have their place. Some things kind of have to be live if they're like music competitions or if they're really topical, or I think most excitingly, if you want to engage real time with a live audience across the globe, potentially. Back in my BBC days, I remember when we launched new programs that you'd watch out for the Twitter feed, and yeah, it was Twitter still then. And to see during a live broadcast all the comments coming in about a program was exciting to watch, as well as feeding back instantly to the people in the studio in a way the broadcasters hadn't had before. Now, of course, when we live stream things, we can all get that instant interaction and feedback. And I think we're not just looking for putting music out there, but we're looking for truly engaging with audiences. And that's what live streaming in particular can do in real time if you can find ways to embrace that. But the on-demand also really has its place. It firstly allows for a lot more polish, and classical musicians do rightly want things to be polished, and so do I. That's my professional background. So when you get the chance to do something that is really beautifully crafted and presents the music in the best possible way, then why not take the opportunity to do that? So I'm really pleased that we do both at Stagecast. Live is very much in our DNA, and I think we go into every project thinking from that live capture perspective, because classical music is a live art form. But when we can kind of take that across to more of a studio-based, specially recorded thing, then we see those benefits come across, and we can polish it a little bit more as well.
Definitely. And I guess there's always the option of a slightly hybrid approach where it's a pre-recorded video that is showcased as a live stream. So you get some of the benefits of live stream interactions on YouTube and social media. But I guess, as you say, like, it's not missing that special source of like, this person has read out the comment that I just said on Twitter, and there's that sort of frustration there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big things we do and have done since Stagecast came along is we stream brass band competitions, and that absolutely, of course, has to be live. It's not quite like watching the stock market or something, but if the word gets out there about who's won a certain prize before the live stream tells people, then what's the point of live streaming it? And brass band fans are serious fanatics, of course, so they do want to know in real time what's going on with those competitions.
Definitely. This is a complete aside, but I've been rewatching the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix about wrestling and the WWE.
Okay.
And they were
Yeah.
speaking during it about the rivalry with a new company called WCW, which was on Time Warner Turner back in the 90s.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that WWE ended successful is they decided that the one thing they could do was that they would be live rather than pre-recorded. So what they would do during the show is that they would say, we are live. If you want to watch the other channel and watch the WCW wrestling, these are the results. And they just read out the results of what was going to happen because they sent someone to the stadiums. So it was, that element of it being live does sort of generate excitement and buzz. And I don't think we'd be in the same way reading out other brass band competition final results, but there's that buzz side, I think, is something really,
There's absolutely
really
the buzz of it. And I think, audiences watching live broadcasts quite enjoy that. They want to see what's going to go wrong or whatever else. Audiences in the venue sometimes love it. And I remember this from my Radio 3 days as well, that it can be, as long as you don't get in the way, it's quite exciting to the audience, the actual audience there in the space, when there are live microphones and cameras, and that at that moment you're suddenly live on air. And I think it's great when concerts aren't afraid, or the performers aren't afraid of saying this is being live broadcast, and involve both audiences in that experience. Actually, in some ways, I mean, let's use it as a a positive way of kind of exciting everybody about being there and making it more of a special occasion, which a great gig or concert should be.
Certainly. Well, speaking of audience interaction and engagement, have there been any experiences with your broadcasts where you've seen audiences around the world sort of connect in a way that you weren't expecting and it take on a life of its own after the stream itself?
Um, yeah, I mean, it does happen from time to time, and it's always really exciting, especially when something has a, as you say, a kind of life that you don't expect. Um, I think the best recent example was something we did for a big games company, and a very large scale, quite polished music video, not live, so didn't have that topicality, but was very topical in that it was released to mark the launch of a new edition of the game. And this is something we've done a few times over in different scenarios, and you do see very strong engagement generally. But this one was a bit different, and not only were people watching in the millions quite quickly because it's a big worldwide audience for that game, but the comments started ticking up as well. So this was, when was this? Last summer, this video went out. And within 2 or 3 months, it had, I think, around 15 million views, but about 2.3 million comments online, which just astonished us. And the other thing actually that video generates is a huge number of reaction videos, which I've never seen from one of our more standard classical productions either. That suddenly you've got lots of people watching your film, commenting on it in real time, making a YouTube video of that and uploading that. And it turned out that was really driven by the casting of the video and the fact that we had a lot of diversity in the choir and the singers and the performers as part of the video. And the game had attracted some comment around diversity around that release, and a feeling that perhaps some of the gameplay characters weren't as diverse as they could have been. The film came out with an incredibly diverse range of characters on screen, and that turned into a real debate between the game players and people watching around the music, how the music represented the game and the characters, and was perhaps more the essence of the game than even the characters themselves in the game were, and turned into a fascinating discussion and debate, with people even making 20 or 30-minute kind of essay videos online about it, but also lots and lots of interaction between people. Now, if music and a performance that's filmed can spark that level of kind of debate, and actually in the end a really positive story about how exciting it was to see diversity on screen and hear it in the music, because this was music that combined a symphony orchestra with traditional folk instruments from different parts of the world. If you can achieve both of those and get a non-traditional classical music audience talking about it and talking in great detail about the instruments and the performers and the performance, then you've achieved something really special. So that's the closest we've had perhaps to a viral moment, if you like. But I'm still just staggered every time I see, I think it's now at 2.5 million comments on that video, which I've never seen anywhere that I can think of.
I think with 2.5 million comments, we can say it's a viral moment. That's definitely
Fine,
sort of in
thank
that
you.
ballpark.
I'll
I
put
don't know
that somewhere
what
on
more
our
you'd need to
CV
do.
now. Fine.
It's amazing. I think, although that was in a gaming context, the idea of it being a conversation starter and a way to continue interaction with a community and an audience after a content event can be applicable to all elements of what we do in the classical music sphere, rather than just it being a special one-off with a gaming project.
Sure. I mean, the other place I've seen incredible interaction, especially around something live, is masterclasses, where when you see incredibly talented younger musicians working with somebody hugely experienced and a big name, an engaged audience in YouTube comments can be both incredibly excited and incredibly nerdy about what they're seeing, and in a way that you don't get in a normal performance. Actually, I think audiences are really fascinated about the nuts and bolts of how great music making happens, how amazing performance is shaped, and how talent develops. So and they will interact around that as well, if you give them the right content.
Totally. Well, I'd love now just to dive a little bit into the weeds and get really practical as to sort of how this comes about, because I think for a lot of people, and myself included, I was very unaware as to how we would create something as a broadcast. What are the processes that goes into it? How do you make it happen? What makes it good? So I'd love to know about your process of creating a broadcast, from the sort of the moment of connecting with a client through to concept creation and then final product. What does that look like as a process from start to finish?
It varies hugely, actually. So I wish I could tell you there was a formulaic process. In fact, that would be quite helpful business-wise for me if it was a more standardized process, and it's not. Varies hugely. We probably do currently around 30 or 40 projects a year of differing scales, and they're all so different. Sometimes the show's already set up and we're just being asked to film it, and that's a relatively straightforward process. But other times we're pitching ideas or working with artists to develop a concept that might get sent to broadcasters or media clients or whatever. So it can vary a lot. Our process, though, always starts from the score and from the music. So I think there's questions I'd ask of people who approach us about who they're trying to reach and why, and make sure that actually broadcasting something is the right thing to be doing, because that's not necessarily a given. But then we start very much from the music and make decisions about how something needs to be filmed and captured. So if it's a full orchestral work or concert, it's going to need to be scripted and planned in an awful lot of detail, and you're going to need more cameras. If it's a solo piano recital, then it can be much simpler and perhaps doesn't need to be planned to quite the same level of detail. But everything is very bespoke, so it's quite difficult to kind of say what the process is.
True. Well, sort of maybe as a flip side then, what are the sorts of things that a potential client would need to be aware of to come to the table that would really help with this process? Or what tips would you help for clients to help formulate their ideas?
Yeah, I think it's some of what I've said already. It's kind of,
Mm.
firstly, who's your audience, and why do you want to reach them? Because there could be lots of different reasons for that. It could be about audience growth and development, and it might be targeting things in your own local area specifically in order to do that, or that might be that you've got a very good reason to have something shown across the world and connect with audiences in different parts of the world. For example, because you want to build up a touring profile in a certain place, or that your albums have been well received in a different part of the world. So actually, let's do something targeted there. What platform should it be on? I think people approaching us, if they've got some idea of that already, it starts to show that they've thought about not just having something filmed because it's a nice, glamorous thing to do, but they're thinking about the audience, where to reach them, and what they're going to be like. Then I think it's, why is this worth filming? What's the story? Why would you, as the musician or your friends or your colleagues, actually bother watching it? And again, have people stop to think about that, because if I'm honest, I'm not sure everybody always does in advance. Then the other thing I suppose I'd say in advance is, how long does this need to be, and what kind of formats might the film be in? Because I think people assume you have to film a whole concert or broadcast a whole concert, perhaps replicate the concert experience that people have been used to for however many hundreds of years online, and that's not always the case. I think on some platforms and broadcasters, in some contexts, it's absolutely the right thing. But you and I know, David, that shorter form video is the stuff that is attracting new audiences in a different way. And I think we'd probably agree that it's better to have a 5 or 10 minute film that really has impact than a 2-hour film that people only watch the first 5 or 10 minutes of anyway, if that. So it's the old quality rather than quantity thing as much as anything else.
Definitely.
Then
And you've
I think a few other things I would just say to clients in terms of the practicalities are, if you're an orchestra or an opera company, you do need to you're not going to get the best result if you don't work from a camera script and actually plan things, and that takes an investment in itself. But you can't get good coverage of a complicated orchestral piece just winging it on the day, which took me a few years to learn that originally, but we now have a very refined technologically assisted scripting process that makes sure we capture every moment the right way. I'd also say, and musicians don't always like hearing this, lighting is just as important as sound, and sound is really crucial. I've got a sound recording degree, so I'm never going to argue with that. But I've learned to my cost that lighting is absolutely as important, and I wish more concert halls were better lit, because then we'd get much more beautiful films. And finally, don't just film for the kind of broadcast and the long form, but if you're doing that anyway, then make sure you're also thinking what's going to work really well on socials, for the teasers, for the trailers, for the short form content that might get just as much or more audience as the concert itself. If you've had the crew and all the kit in there for a day and you haven't made the short form stuff as well as the long form stuff, you've missed the trick.
Certainly. I think it's really interesting you mentioned about that idea of working out what the short form is. And I just saw, before coming onto this call, Symphony.live, one of the concert streaming platforms, they were showing a success story from TikTok where they had 1,000 followers in total. And they posted an encore from a violinist called Charles Yang. And I think they said it went from 1,000 to 25,000 followers in one day. They had 5 million views. And the idea of it being a segmented thing that is for this change in consumer behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it only takes one thing. And it can be, whether you call it viral or organic, absolutely the right thing can rapidly push your followers up. And I think that's why actually we're getting more approaches now from some of our orchestra clients and other big organizations, specifically just to help with the short form stuff. And it doesn't need to be over polished and over expensive necessarily, but they do see the benefit of coming to a team that know how to kind of shoot stuff well enough and help them make something that's a little bit more than what you get on the phone, but
definitely
really represents the musicians doing what they do so brilliantly.
Eye on the future, changing consumer behavior. I'd be really interested to have a quick chat as to what the future for broadcasting looks like. I was going to keep it very open-ended, but then had a very specific thought to throw at you. And we've seen lots of innovation in the world of sport over the years as to what the visual side of broadcast is. And I found out recently that having the score on the screen during a sports match wasn't always the case. And the score and the time and the clock only came in the Premier League in 1992 and not into the NFL till 1994. And that little thing in the top corner is called the score bug. And then from there, we've seen changes move on. In 1998, the NFL put that little yellow line of scrimmage across where they need to get to. And since then, we've got all sorts of graphics and visual overlays to enhance the performance. Whereas even before we get to how it's been filmed, there's not been that much change in the way a classical music concert's really been filmed in the last 50, 60 years. Do you see a future where this sort of additional visual overlay and changing and experimenting with tech may be something that is in the future for us? Just to throw a deep and hard question at you.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think we shouldn't be bound by either how things have been done before or by any kind of sense that the presentation needs to be limited in a certain way, or that the art form is so pure that you can't try all sorts of different things, from creative approaches to text or scores or contextual information or what you might call program notes or all the rest. I think traditional presentations kind of not always appropriate and the right thing anymore, and can instantly make something feel a little bit old-fashioned if you're not careful. But what great presenters used to do and still do is they really put what can be complicated art into context. And so anything that helps do that, as well as makes things work more impactfully visually, I think is really exciting. I mean, in terms of where things might go, I mean, tech-wise, I'm finally getting a little bit excited about immersive video, and having seen the demo of Apple Vision Pro, I haven't forked out for one yet. But seen what content can look like in that incredible high resolution 180-degree kind of space. Quite excited to try that actually as another way of really putting people in the performance and maybe at a spot in the performance where they wouldn't normally be able to go. I think things will continue to develop in other ways as well. I think visual quality needs to stay up there, and the classical music used to be the benchmark for sound quality production. Deutsche Grammophon, EMI, and Philips and others, Decca, kind of were the benchmarks for great sound on records across any genre. And it's great that a few people want to do some of the same for video, and because this is, when you're capturing some of these performances, they're things that you want to last for potentially decades and more into the future. You want people to still enjoy watching them, so that's part of it. You want a bit of future proofing, but we should probably be shooting everything in 4K and high dynamic range video that is much more kind of subtle and beautiful on screen. Actually, is something that we've only just started looking at ourselves, but that the sports people have been doing for years and years now. I'd also hope we might see a little bit more music on some of the big streaming platforms as well as these specialist ones. Wouldn't it be great if there was a bit more on Netflix and Amazon and Apple especially? And I think finally maybe a bit more creative production as well, and not just live concert captures, but this is already happening, but more and more really creative ways to present music on screen would be fab.
Very true. I think it's a really good point. And like with Marquee TV doing theatre as well as music, on Apple TV there's a production of Macbeth that's sitting there. So wouldn't it be great if there's some other crossover with it? Really good points. Well,
yeah, I think so. I mean, and we work with the London Symphony Orchestra. A good friend of mine, Don Best, has been making some films for Marquee that complement the live concerts that we film, with Tony Pappano in the studio or Aletto St Luke's, where the orchestra rehearse with the orchestra, talking the audience through a piece for 20-25 minutes, which you can watch before you watch the live concert, or just standalone. It's great when people think outside the box of just broadcasting a concert and say, what could we do that complements this, or adds more context to it, or tells the story, or brings it alive. I mean, not everyone is a communicator like Sir Antonio Pappano is on screen. He's a natural. I think he loves the camera and the camera loves him, so that helps. But anything that brings the music to life is what we're up for doing, and sometimes you can just do that with brilliant camera work as well. And we kind of live for the moments where there's something in the directing or the camera work or the shooting of music in a certain space that just really accentuates the music or highlights a moment where the music soars and the camera soars at the same time. Or we were looking at something recently which was not classical, but the quite epic Ray live concert from the Albert Hall that is on BBC at the moment, and it's spectacularly shot, but there's one moment where all they do is just hold the camera on her as she sings this incredible long note, and the kind of world stops and the camera stops in what is a epic pop concert, because that's the most impactful thing to do, and the music really moves you at that point. We live for the moments when we can use cameras and directing to create those kinds of things in a piece of music as well.
How wonderful. Well, just to start wrapping up, time to throw you the sort of the what are going to become the standard Future of Classical Music podcast questions. So, okay, putting you on the spot, if you could change one thing in the industry, what would it be and why?
Ooh. Only one thing. That's
have a shopping list now.
I think I would love to see more musicians and music organizations put digital content as something that's at the heart of their artistic production and agenda, and not just see it as a kind of marketing or other bolt-on. I firmly believe the digital audience is just as important as the physical audience in person. And when digital sits at the heart of your artistic program, as well as being a marketing thing, then actually we'll start to see what the Premier League have done with football, actually.
I couldn't agree more. And then as a final question, what gives you hope for the future of classical music and where do you see opportunity?
I think what gives me hope is not just those incredible audiences that we see online and the reactions to those videos, which generally does give me hope, including some of the wacky reaction videos, which, are sometimes far more fun to watch even than the films we make that they're commenting on. But also the audiences that I do still see at the concerts that I go to and the concerts that we film that are filling the halls. And there was a brilliant thing we did with the BBC a few weeks ago. We were able to help with filming something in Aviva Studios in Manchester. And I saw some of the audience reaction because the audience were mingling around the orchestra who were on 3 different stages, and looking at the faces of hugely diverse and interesting group of audience members as they experienced an orchestra from the inside, in that case, because they were kind of expanded into these 3 different blocks. People were literally there with kind of jaws dropping or completely transfixed by the music. And it was young people, old people, I suspect quite a lot who'd not been to standard orchestral concerts before. And when you see their faces, actually, that gives me huge hope for the future of classical music or orchestral music, or whatever you want to describe it as.
What a wonderful note to end on. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining me. If people listening are wanting to see what Stagecast do, find out more about it, or even connect you and reach out and chat more about everything digital, where are you in the world and how can they get in touch?
We are at www.stagecast.net. So easily found there, and there's links to lots of the things we make there. But you'll see our work all over the place. You'll quite often see the Stagecast name. So watch out for Stagecast at the end of a lot of the films you might see, but you know where to find us via the website if you wish to, and always exciting to hear from new people, especially if they've got creative ideas that we can be part of. That would be wonderful.
I'd like to thank Matt Parkin, CEO and co-founder of Stagecast, for taking the time to join me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to let me know what you think of the podcast, any requests for topics, or in fact anything else, you can email david@david-taylor.org or reach out at LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, or Blue Sky. You can find links to all of those at david-taylor.org. If you like the podcast, please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you next time.